A beautiful young woman walked up to a young man's door. She looked very excited about their date today. She'd even prepared a lunchbox as a gift for the special occasion. But the young man didn't remember having a date with her. The confused young man asked who she was, but she didn't seem to understand the question. Obviously, she was Rikun's girlfriend, and her expression was almost hurt that he'd asked such a strange thing. She began to suspect something, thinking there was another reason he wouldn't let her in. Maybe he was two-timing her with some girl from the office. She demanded to know where this homewrecker was. The young man cut her off and explained that he wasn't Rikun. Immediately, she apologized profusely for the mix-up. It turned out that in her rush to leave the house, she had forgotten to wear her contact lenses. A week had passed since the young man last saw that strange girl. Suddenly, he realized it was quite noisy outside and discovered that his next-door neighbor had moved out. The young man had never seen his face, only the movers carrying out pieces of furniture one by one. The young man returned home, enjoying the familiar comfort. But just a few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. The young man slowly opened the door, and the girl from last week peeked her head in to look. She seemed flustered, fidgeting on the spot, then asked if the young man still remembered her. The young man gave a small nod, clearly remembering that she was the girlfriend of the neighbor who had just moved out. She closed her eyes, looking tired, and then told him that she had broken up with him a few days ago. The young man expressed his sympathy. She explained that the guy had been cheating, or rather two-timing, even though he had a girlfriend as beautiful and devoted as her. Rikun would often bring other women into his home for all sorts of reasons, claiming it was for work or that they were just good friends. The young man felt a bit angry on her behalf and asked, "What kind of idiot would do that to a kind young woman like you?" She let out a small laugh, trying to brush off the heavy feeling to change the mood. She said that she came today to apologize for the inconvenience she had caused during her previous visit. She gently offered a small paper bag, inside of which was a cake she had baked herself. The young man smiled reassuringly, telling her it was no problem at all. The young man invited her into his home and offered to make her a cup of tea. It seemed like she had been through a rough day. The young man's invitation surprised her, and her eyes lit up. She smiled brightly, happily accepting the invitation and stepping into the young man's apartment. She seemed eager to spend a little time with the young man, though she still politely apologized for bothering him. Unfortunately, the young man didn't notice the strange look in her eyes as she quietly closed the door behind him. The young man apologized for the mess in his home, as he hadn't been prepared for guests, but she just smiled, unbothered, and said that his room was actually tidier than he described. The young man wondered if she was just being polite or was genuinely complimenting him. The young man was about to go to the kitchen to cut and serve the cake. He asked if she was okay waiting a moment while he made tea. She looked up, explaining that the cake was too small to be cut into individual portions. She told the young man not to worry about her share and that she would be happy if he enjoyed it all by himself. She called the young man Ikuto, and at that moment, a strange thought suddenly occurred to him. He had never told her his name. Ikuto turned back to look at the girl and asked how she knew his name. She quickly made up a reason, saying that some of his mail had once been accidentally delivered to her ex-boyfriend's mailbox, and she remembered his name because it was quite unique. The explanation seemed plausible, so Ikuto didn't think much more of it. She apologized for startling him a bit, and she looked genuinely remorseful. Then she realized she hadn't introduced herself. She said her name was Yue, and remarked that it seemed like fate had brought them together. She hoped that we could get along. Ikuto felt a bit conflicted about getting closer to Yue, especially since she had just broken up with his neighbor. There were clearly a lot of warning signs, but it seemed he was once again oblivious, not noticing the light slowly fading from her eyes. Ikuto carefully opened the cake that Yue had made for him. The little cake was beautifully decorated and even had strawberries, his favorite fruit. She hoped the cake would suit Ikuto's taste and watched anxiously as he began to eat. Ikuto picked up a fork, noticing Yue's intense gaze on him. Ikuto told her she was making him nervous. Finally, Ikuto took a bite of the sweet cake and realized it was truly delicious. Yue looked incredibly relieved. She explained that it had been a while since she last baked and she'd added some medicine to it, so she was worried Ikuto would notice a difference in the taste. Wait, did you just say you added medicine? Ikuto's head suddenly became fuzzy, and his vision started to blur. He should have been panicking, but strangely, he felt an odd sense of peace. Ikuto saw a suspicious smile appear on Yue's face. Everything went dark, and the last thing Ikuto heard was Yue wishing him a good night. When he woke up, Ikuto's head was throbbing, and he couldn't remember what had happened. Yue was here just a second ago, and then Ikuto felt something soft and warm on his cheek. Ikuto opened his eyes and saw Yue leaning over him. It seemed her hand had been stroking him while he slept. Ikuto asked how he could have fallen asleep like that. She explained that he must have been exhausted after a long day at work. Ikuto accepted her explanation without any suspicion, but then he realized his head was resting on her lap. Too embarrassed and trying to maintain a minimum of courtesy, Ikuto quickly sat up. This was definitely not something Ikuto would normally do with a girl. Ikuto had only just met Yue, but she giggled and reassured him that there was nothing to worry about because she really enjoyed watching his sleeping face. Ikuto really didn't know how to react to that. He just felt confused, unable to believe he had fallen asleep on Yue's lap like that. Even though Ikuto had been working a lot of overtime recently, but looking outside, Ikuto realized it was already past 6 in the evening. Yue suddenly exclaimed, and then hurriedly prepared to leave, thinking she had stayed too long. Ikuto apologized for not being a better host, but Yue reassured him that it was fine. Yue boldly asked if she could visit Ikuto again. Seeing no problem with it, Ikuto said he would be happy for her to stop by again. Yue smiled cheerfully, saying she was also looking forward to seeing Ikuto next time. After Yue left, Ikuto returned to his room, dreamily thinking about how cute Yue was. But he still couldn't help but wonder why he had passed out like that. Ikuto noticed the dishes had been washed and put away neatly, while the room looked even tidier than usual. Yue must have cleaned the house while Ikuto was out of it. Ikuto almost felt guilty about it. Meanwhile, Yue was tightly clutching a key to Ikuto's apartment in her hand. She was happily hanging the laundry as today was laundry day. Yue accidentally brushed against Ikuto's underwear. She almost recoiled in embarrassment. But despite her shame, she told herself she had to do her best for Ikuto's sake. After all, she was planning on becoming his ideal girlfriend. That evening, Ikuto returned home and felt it was strange to see the laundry already hung out to dry. Ikuto quickly called his mother to ask if she had stopped by his place. His mother immediately denied it, confirming that Ikuto's spare key was still at her house. Ikuto immediately made plans to go to his mother's house to get the key back. Something felt off, but Ikuto couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Meanwhile, Yue, in a perfect disguise, was happily listening to something on her phone. It turned out Yue was eavesdropping on Ikuto's conversation with his mother. Yue giggled to herself as she heard Ikuto thinking his mom had come all that way just to do his laundry. Yue thought Ikuto was so silly. A few days later, Yue quietly watched Ikuto from a distance as he entered his office. She could barely contain her excitement seeing how handsome Ikuto looked in a suit, and she trembled with happiness. A couple of guys happened to notice Yue. Attracted by her beautiful looks and alluring figure, they decided to approach her and strike up a conversation. They tried to flirt with Yue, asking her to come have some fun with them. However, Yue's eyes instantly darkened, completely losing their kindness. In a cold, sharp voice, she said that she was waiting for the man she loves and demanded they leave immediately. Better yet, Yue even told them that one of the guys whispered to his friend that there was something seriously wrong with this girl, and it was best they just leave her alone. The other guy burst out laughing, calling his friend a coward for being scared of something like that. But the first guy insisted they should get out of there immediately. At 6 p.m. sharp, Ikuto walked out of the office after a rare day of finishing work early. He was tired and carelessly bumped into a girl, sending the contents of her bag spilling onto the ground. As it turned out, the girl was Yue. Ikuto thought this was quite an interesting coincidence. Yue seemed pleasantly surprised to see Ikuto. She explained that she had closed her shop early to do a little shopping. Ikuto was still quite surprised to run into her, but he was even more surprised to learn that she owned and ran a shop. While helping Yue pick up her things, Ikuto's hand accidentally touched hers. He could almost hear Yue's heart pounding. Yue said that she had bought a little too much today, so she was about to invite him somewhere. However, before she could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by a cheerful senpai from one of Ikuto's junior colleagues. Ikuto didn't notice it, but Yue seemed to nearly lose her composure. A cheerful, short-haired girl ran up to them. Ikuto immediately recognized that energetic attitude and her signature snaggletooth. It was Adano, his bright and energetic junior, who was asking him to go for a drink. Adano finally noticed Yue and immediately asked who she was. Before Yue could declare that she was Ikuto's girlfriend, Adano beat her to it. She loudly asked if Yue was Ikuto's girlfriend. Ikuto hastily denied it, saying she had the wrong idea. He quickly explained that Yue was just his old neighbor's ex-girlfriend, and that they had become friends after a few incidents. When Adano understood the situation, she was immensely relieved, and that relief did not escape Yue's sharp gaze. Yue looked at Adano with eyes that could pierce right through this interloper. Adano called over Matsuda, another of Ikuto's colleagues, saying that Ikuto could join them for drinks. But wait a minute, Ikuto hadn't even said anything yet. He was also worried that Yue might feel left out. Adano pulled Matsuda closer, and the moment he saw Yue, he seemed instantly captivated. Matsuda introduced himself as one of Ikuto's colleagues, and Yue politely nodded in greeting. Adano waved goodbye to Yue, then tried to drag Ikuto along with her and Matsuda. But Ikuto remembered that Yue had still been talking to him, so he tried to ask what she had been saying. Matsuda, hearing that Ikuto already had plans, almost let him go, but for some reason he kept quiet. Yu put on a brave smile, reassuring Ikuto that she could always visit him another time. She cheerfully promised to make him some cookies next time, and Ikuto eagerly looked forward to it. Edano loudly urged Matsuda to do the thing, and Matsuda immediately threw an arm around Ikuto's shoulders, pulling him off towards the group's favorite bar. Edano waved to Yue again, and Ikuto managed to wave goodbye from a distance. Yue, with a smile on her face, waved back. However, the moment Ikuto and his friends were out of earshot, Yue and Edano shot each other a look, as if their gazes were locked in a duel. In their minds, there can only be one. Ikuto sat down with Matsuda and Edano at their usual spot at the counter of their favorite bar. It was a crowded Friday evening. Edano started talking about the traffic accident they had just seen on their way there. She expressed her fear after witnessing it. Matsuda added that a car had hit two young men, and he was worried about their condition. Ikuto nodded sympathetically, agreeing that it was truly a terrible thing. Edano said she felt a little anxious about going home alone after seeing an accident like that. However, Ikuto's mind unintentionally drifted to Yue, who he knew also had to walk home by herself. Noticing Ikuto was lost in thought, Edano glanced over and asked him what was on his mind. Ikuto frankly admitted that he was thinking about Yue and worrying about her safety. This seemed to upset Edano a bit. She became irritated, pointing out that she was right there in front of him, yet he was worrying about someone else. Ikuto stammered an apology, trying to smooth things over. Matsuda, with a cheerful attitude, joked that he was there too, but was immediately silenced when Edano stomped her heel hard on his foot, making him yelp in pain. Edano reassured Ikuto that Yue would be fine getting home on her own. Meanwhile, Yue had already begun her investigation, using her natural talent for research to gather every detail about Edano's life. For example, Yue discovered Edano was 24, her parents were still healthy, and most importantly, that Edano lived alone. At the bar, Matsuda stood up to go to the restroom, leaving Ikuto alone with a slightly drunk Edano. Edano asked Ikuto if he wasn't going to have another drink. He replied that he'd had enough, but expressed concern about her having to go home alone. Edano sat up straight and insisted she would be fine. However, she shared that she was a little worried about something. Ikuto asked what was bothering her, and unexpectedly Edano reached out towards him with both hands. She asked if Ikuto would be willing to go somewhere with her, just the two of them. Ikuto was stunned by the sudden invitation, his hands trembling, unsure how to react. He pulled his hands back and apologized. He explained that they'd both had a bit too much to drink, and whatever important thing Edano was thinking about, it would probably be better to leave it for next week. Edano, who looked almost crushed by Ikuto's answer, sat there with a look of disappointment. When Matsuda returned to the table, the group headed for the exit. They walked a short distance to an intersection where they each parted ways. Ikuto entrusted Edano's safety to Matsuda, and Matsuda reassured him that she would be safe. Matsuda and Edano walked down a rather deserted street. Matsuda remarked that Edano seemed a bit cold tonight. Edano immediately told him to shut his useless mouth. They stopped near a convenience store, and Matsuda excused himself for a moment. Suddenly, Edano received a call from an unknown number. She picked up, saying hello into the seemingly silent line, but then she heard a familiar voice. Yue asked Edano if she had enjoyed her little get-together with Ikuto. Warning bells went off in Edano's head. She recognized Yue's voice, though she was a bit surprised by the sudden call. Edano immediately asked Yue how she got her phone number. However, Yue didn't answer Edano's question. Instead, she apologized for calling so late and asked Edano to do her a small favor. Yu recounted the fight with her ex-boyfriend, admitting that maybe she was partly at fault for not warning the girl he was cheating with. This time, she was determined not to make the same mistake. Yue demanded that Edano promise not to get close to Ikuto again if she valued her life. Edano almost did a spit take, even though she didn't have a drink in her hand. She burst out laughing, unable to believe what she was hearing. After composing herself, Edano replied that she and Ikuto were simply colleagues, a junior and a senior, and there was absolutely nothing to worry about. Yue thanked Edano for her cooperation and said she would take her word for it. At that very moment, however, someone seemed to be approaching Edano from the shadows. A few minutes later, Matsuda returned, his arms full of bottled drinks. He noticed Edano seemed strange and asked her what was wrong. Edano smiled, shook her head, and said that she'd had a change of heart. Later, as Ikuto was getting ready for bed, he was completely unaware of what was happening outside. Ikuto felt a little worried that he might have rejected Edano too harshly, but he also couldn't bring himself to say that he'd been thinking about Yue when Edano asked him to go out alone with her. Tired and exhausted, Ikuto was about to go to sleep when he heard the doorbell. It rang twice more, followed by 2 quick knocks. He wondered who could possibly be visiting him at this hour. Looking through the peephole, Ikuto saw Matsuda trying to support a very obviously drunk Edano. He quickly opened the door and asked Matsuda what had happened. Matsuda explained that he and Edano had gone for another round of drinks. But when he stepped away for a few minutes, he came back to find her completely wasted. Since he didn't know where she lived, he had no other choice but to bring her to Ikuto's place. Ikuto put a hand on his hip, rubbed his temples, and sighed. He knew he couldn't just leave Adano in that state, so he agreed to let Matsuda bring her inside until she sobered up. Matsuda gently set Adano down on the floor and carefully took off her shoes. But then he suddenly excused himself, saying he had to be up early the next morning. Matsuda left, leaving Ikuto alone with a passed-out Idano. Ikuto felt uncomfortable letting a female colleague into his home at this hour, but he had no other choice, as Adano was in no condition to get home by herself. He helped Adano into his apartment and offered her some water while she waited. However, Ikuto failed to notice the mischievous smile slowly spreading across Adano's face. Outside, Matsuda was on his way home with a worried and conflicted expression. He hoped he had done the right thing by leaving Adano with Ikuto. Model ceased,